Today, we're going to delve into one of the biggest fears of adventure: lovers. 7 horror stories involving people who got lost on trails. Get ready to hear chilling stories from hikers and adventurers who, in the middle of nature, ended up facing the despair of isolation, the unknown, and pure suspense. We're going to explore real stories full of tension, showing how a simple walk can quickly turn into a real nightmare. So, sit back, make sure you know the way back, and let's start this spine-chilling journey. Oh, and before the trail disappears beneath your feet, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and leave a like. This helps the channel a lot and ensures that you don't miss any scary content like this. Let's go. 1. The disappearance in the canyon. The Swiss Alps have always fascinated adventurers and nature lovers. With trails that wind through deep valleys and dizzying gorges, the Lauterbrunnen region is considered one of the most beautiful and dangerous in the world. It was there, in early September 2019, that a group of 4 friends decided to push their limits on a famous trail, but marked by reports of disappearances and accidents that have never been fully explained. The group consisted of Clara, a biology student, Lucas, an amateur photographer, Daniel, a newly graduated engineer, and Sophie, a French teacher. They had known each other since they were teenagers and had been planning this trip for years. The weather was perfect: clear skies, mild temperatures, and the fresh scent of the mountains. The plan was simple: hike the Trommelbock Gorge Trail, capture the views, and camp at the foot of the mountains. On the second day of the hike, as they approached the narrowest part of the canyon, Lucas broke away from the group to take photos of a waterfall that tumbled between the rocks. It was common. He always got lost in the search for the perfect angle. But that morning, after a longer time than usual, Clara realized that Lucas had not returned. They called out to him, walked the stretch back, but found no sign, no footprints, no marks of displacement, no response to their shouts. Tensions mounted in the group. Daniel tried to remain calm, suggesting that Lucas might have gone on ahead, distracted, but it soon became clear that something was wrong. Sophie, trembling, called the local police, but the signal was weak and the call was cut off before she could explain the situation. They decided to split up. Clara and Daniel would follow the main trail, while Sophie would wait at the spot where Lucas was last seen. As they walked along, Clara and Daniel began to notice disturbing details: broken branches, fresh bootprints in the mud marks that belonged to none of them. The silence of the mountains, once comforting, now seemed oppressive, as if nature itself were watching them. At one point, they found a red ribbon tied to a bush, just like the one Lucas used to tie his hair back. Nearby, a deep footprint, larger than any of the group's, pointed to a secondary trail, barely visible and off the official route. Their survival instinct spoke louder, but their concern for their friend made them follow the unknown trail. The path became increasingly narrow, flanked by cliffs and dense vegetation. At every turn, Clara felt the uncomfortable sensation of being watched. Daniel, more rational, tried to calm his friend down, but he himself was already sweating cold. At a certain point, they heard a twig snap behind them. They turned around quickly, but saw nothing but shadows. Meanwhile, Sophie, alone, began to realize that she was not as isolated as she thought. The sound of light, almost imperceptible footsteps echoed among the rocks. She tried to call the police again, but the phone had no signal. Fear paralyzed her, and she limited herself to hiding behind a rock, watching the trail. Then she saw a hooded figure cross the path, stopping exactly where Lucas had disappeared. The stranger looked around, as if searching for something, and disappeared into the woods. Clara and Daniel, increasingly tense, found Lucas's handkerchief stuck to a branch, stained with dirt. The object seemed to have been left there on purpose, as a warning or a trap. The couple decided to return, but realized they were being followed. The sound of footsteps, previously distant, was now constant, alternating between approaching and suddenly disappearing. Fear turned to despair when, as they tried to return to the main trail, they realized they were disoriented. The vegetation looked different, and the marks they had left along the way had disappeared. Night fell quickly, bringing with it a biting cold. With no sign of Lucas and unable to make contact with anyone, the 3 friends decided to take shelter in a clearing, taking turns sleeping. During the early hours of the morning, Clara woke up to the sound of whispers. Looking around, she saw, through the trees, the glow of a lantern being shaken from side to side. Daniel woke up to the noise, and together, they observed the silhouette of someone standing a few meters away, motionless, just watching. The stranger did not come closer, but he did not leave either. They decided to take a risk and run to the starting point of the trail. They arrived exhausted, dirty, and in shock. When they reported the incident to the police, they were informed that other similar cases had been recorded in the region, all involving hikers who had strayed from the group and disappeared without a trace. No bodies were ever found, only personal objects left at strategic points, as if someone wanted to make their presence felt. The search for Lucas continued for weeks, without success. The case gained international attention, but was never solved. The traumatized friends never returned to the Alps. His disappearance in the pass remains a mystery, fueling local legends about a silent observer who knows every bend in the trail, and who is always one step ahead. 2. Signal Cutoff, Oregon, United States. The Willamette National Forest, with its ancient trees and winding trails, has always attracted adventurers seeking solitude and contact with the wild. For Marina and Rafael, a Brazilian couple living in Portland, the idea of spending a weekend exploring the forest seemed like the perfect way to relieve the stress of the city. They chose a little-known trail, recommended in online forums for its beauty and tranquility, without imagining that their choice would put them in a situation of pure terror. At first, everything seemed normal. The couple walked among giant pine trees, hearing only the sound of their own footsteps and the distant chirping of birds. The cell phone signal was weak, but that didn't worry them. After all, they wanted to disconnect from the world. Rafael recorded everything with his camera, while Marina marked the route on a GPS app. Around noon, they stopped for a snack and noticed something strange. Both cell phones had no signal, not only for the internet, but also for the network. The GPS, which until then had worked offline, crashed and restarted by itself. At first, they tried not to be alarmed. The forest was dense, and signal dropouts were common. They decided to follow the marked trail, but soon they began to notice strange markings on the trees, geometric-shaped cuts, symbols they didn't recognize, and red ribbons tied to high branches. Marina, who had experience on trails, found this unusual. "These are not for guidance or rescue," she muttered uneasily as they walked along. They noticed that the ribbons and symbols seemed to form an alternative path, diverting them from the main trail. At each fork, the markings became more frequent, and, in some places, they found objects hanging: a child's t-shirt, an old cap, a broken flashlight. The suspense intensified when, as they tried to return, they realized that the markings were now also behind them, as if someone had recently placed them. Fear set in when they heard branches snapping in the distance, followed by hurried footsteps. Rafael tried to use the emergency whistle, but the sound was lost among the trees. Marina suggested they climb a high rock to try to pick up a signal, but when they reached the top, they saw a figure standing between the tree trunks in the distance, watching them. The stranger was wearing dark clothes and a cap, his face hidden by the shadows. When he realized he had been noticed, he disappeared into the woods with quick, silent movements. Desperate, they decided to run back to the initial trail, but everything seemed different. The trees were denser, and the marks now indicated a circular path, taking them back to the same point several times. Time passed quickly, and the sun began to set, casting long, threatening shadows. The couple took shelter under a fallen tree, trying to stay calm. Rafael suggested waiting until dawn, but Marina realized that they were being led into a trap. During the night, they heard whispers and footsteps all around them. At one point, a flashlight was turned on a few meters away, briefly illuminating the face of the stranger, a middle-aged man with a cold gaze and a blank expression. He said nothing, just watched for a few seconds before turning off the light and disappearing again. At dawn, Marina and Rafael tried to escape once more, but found a makeshift fence made of branches and wire blocking their path. On one of the branches hung a cell phone identical to Rafael's, with a cracked screen. The device turned on by itself, displaying a message: "You are exactly where I wanted you." The couple, in panic, began to scream for help. Hours later, they heard distant voices. It was a rescue team, called by family members after the couple failed to return at the agreed time. Marina and Rafael were found exhausted, dehydrated, and in a state of shock. When reporting what they had experienced, the rescuers revealed that the area was known for reports of missing hikers and mysterious marks on trees, but they had never been able to identify the person responsible. The case was investigated, but the man was never found. The episode was highlighted in the local media, serving as a warning to those who venture onto the isolated trails of Oregon. Marina and Raphael never went hiking again. To this day, they avoid talking about what they saw in that forest, but they are certain that, among the trees, someone is still watching, waiting for the next opportunity to cut the signal, and much more. 3. The Mountain Hunter. In the icy expanse of Argentine Patagonia, where the wind blows bitterly and the solitude seems endless, two Brazilian brothers, Andre and Felipe, decided to challenge one of the most remote trails in the region, the Cerro Castillo crossing. The idea was simple: to explore the wilderness, record the adventure, and strengthen family ties. But what began as a journey of self-improvement soon turned into a real nightmare, the kind that leaves a lasting mark on those who survive. The trail was challenging, surrounded by snow-capped peaks, crystal-clear lakes, and dense forests. On the third day, after an unexpected storm, the brothers lost the main trail. Their GPS failed, and the printed map became unusable after getting wet. They tried to follow the marks on the trees, but soon realized they were walking in circles. The cold was increasing, and the feeling of isolation was total. As they sought shelter, they found the remains of a destroyed camp, torn tents, scattered clothing, and broken utensils. There were signs of a struggle and dark stains on the ground, which Philippe preferred not to examine closely. The scene was disturbing, but the brothers tried to rationalize. Perhaps wild animals had invaded the camp, or a panicked group had fled in a hurry. As night approached, they decided to set up camp near a stream. The silence was absolute, interrupted only by the sound of the wind and branches breaking in the distance. As they prepared dinner, they heard a dry gunshot echoing between the mountains. The two looked at each other, fear written all over their faces. There was no sign of other hikers, and the feeling of being watched became oppressive. During the early hours of the morning, Andre woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps and the rustling of leaves. He peeked through the opening in the tent, and saw, in the distance, the silhouette of a tall man, wearing camouflage clothing and carrying a rifle. The stranger walked slowly, inspecting the destroyed camp. Andre woke Philippe silently, and together they decided to wait, motionless, until the stranger disappeared into the darkness. At dawn, the brothers found fresh footprints around their tent. There was no doubt about it. They were being followed. They decided to quickly dismantle camp and head towards a valley that, according to the map, led to a secondary road. Along the way, they noticed makeshift traps, nylon cords stretched between trees, sharp branches buried in the ground. Someone knew every inch of that terrain and used the environment as a weapon. Fear turned to despair when, as they crossed a clearing, they heard another shot. The bullet hit a tree a few meters away from where they were. They ran, panting, dodging obstacles, until they found an abandoned cabin. They took refuge there, trying to come up with a plan. Inside, they found scraps of food, scribbled maps, and old photos of hikers. In some faces were scribbled in red pen. It was impossible not to think that they were in front of the hiding place of someone dangerous. Time seemed to drag on. At every noise, the brothers held their breath, waiting for the worst. The armed man circled the cabin, testing doors and windows, whistling a strange tune. At one point, he tried to force his way in, but the brothers managed to block the door. With furniture, the stranger did not insist. Instead, he left a note pinned to the window: "You shouldn't be here." When night fell again, Andre and Philippe decided to risk an escape. They climbed out through the back window and continued, in silence, guided only by the moonlight. The pursuer, however, seemed to predict their every move. With each attempt to evade them, they heard footsteps behind them, always in the distance, but never far enough to relax. Exhausted and hungry, the brothers finally saw the road in the distance. Just when they thought they were safe, they heard one last shot. The bullet passed close to Felipe's shoulder, and he fell, wounded. Andre, in a panic, dragged his brother to the road, where they were found by a group of tourists in a jeep. The police were called, but the search for the mountain man was unsuccessful. The brothers' reports coincided with other cases of missing or attacked hikers in the region, but the hunter was never identified. The case gained repercussion in the Argentine press, and the Cerro Castillo trail was temporarily closed. Andre and Philippe survived, but they carry physical and psychological scars. The experience left deep scars, and both avoid talking about those days. What happened in the mountains of Patagonia remains a mystery, but it serves as a warning to those who believe that the greatest danger in nature is only wild animals. Sometimes, the true predator knows every trail, every hiding place, and is always waiting for new prey. What's up, guys? The stories of people who got lost on trails are spine-chilling, aren't they? If you're enjoying these suspenseful and tense stories, take a quick break, subscribe to the channel, and leave a like. This really helps the channel grow and motivates me to continue bringing you more spine-chilling content. Now, let's get back to the next stories. There's still a lot of mysterious trails ahead. For the last checkpoint, New Zealand's South Island is famous for its wilderness and challenging trails, but few are as legendary as the Milford Track. In January 2022, 5 friends, Lucas, Mariana, Tomas, Helena and Gabriel, decided to document the entire route for a travel channel. What started out as excitement and breathtaking scenery quickly turned into a nightmare that would forever mark their lives. The first few days were filled with wonder, crystal clear lakes, ancient forests, and the absolute silence of nature. The well-equipped group kept in touch via radio and GPS, but they soon realized that the trail became more deserted and the weather more oppressive as they advanced. On the third day, they came across an old abandoned checkpoint, covered in moss and graffiti. The site, according to reports, was a historical landmark, but had not been officially used for years. As they crossed the checkpoint, the atmosphere changed. The silence grew denser, and the trail seemed less marked. Mariana commented on a strange sensation, as if they were being watched. Lucas, always skeptical, downplayed the feeling, but that night Tomas disappeared. His tent was open, his belongings intact, and there were no signs of a struggle. The group searched for hours, but the forest seemed to swallow up any trace. The radio went silent and the GPS began to fail, showing impossible locations. The next day, they decided to move on, hoping to find help. With every kilometer, the tension increased. Helena found Tomas' bracelet attached to a branch, as if it had been left there on purpose. Gabriel suggested going back, but Lucas insisted on going, believing that Tomas might be ahead. That night, it was Helena's turn to disappear. The group woke up to muffled screams, and, when they left the shacks, found only drag marks in the mud, heading towards the dense forest. Desperation took over. Mariana had panic attacks, while Lucas tried to maintain his rationality. Gabriel, the quietest, began to observe the forest with suspicion, claiming to have seen shadows moving among the trees. On the fourth day, they found an old hiker shelter, a partially destroyed wooden cabin. Inside, there were recent signs of use, food scraps, clothes drying, and scribbled maps with alternative routes through the forest. While exploring the shelter, Mariana found a small camera hidden between the ceiling beams. When reviewing the footage, she saw disturbing scenes. Someone wearing a makeshift mask was watching the group from a distance, filming their movements from the beginning of the trail. In some of the recordings, it was possible to see Tomas and Helena being dragged into the shelter, gagged and tied up. The kidnapper seemed to know every detail of the route, anticipating the hikers' steps and manipulating the electronic equipment to disorient them. Lucas, Mariana and Gabriel decided to flee, but they realized they were surrounded. Makeshift traps blocked the exit routes, and the sounds of footsteps and whistles echoed through the forest. At one point, Gabriel was hit by a rock and fell unconscious. Lucas and Mariana managed to drag him to a clearing, where they finally picked up a weak radio signal. They managed to send a distressed message, but the battery died soon after. Night fell, and fear reached its peak. The kidnapper, now visible from a distance, circled the clearing, shining a flashlight on the group. Lucas tried to confront him, but was easily overpowered. Mariana, in despair, ran through the forest, guided only by the moonlight. After hours of running, she found a dirt road and was rescued by a group of hikers who were passing by in a car. The police were called and, after an intensive search, found the shelter and freed Gabriel, seriously injured but alive. Tomas and Helena were never found. The kidnapper, a former park employee with a history of mental disorders, disappeared into the forest and was never captured. The case shocked New Zealand and gained international attention, serving as a warning of the real danger that can lurk even on the most famous trails. Mariana and Gabriel never went back to hiking. Lucas, traumatized, abandoned the travel channel and isolated himself. The old checkpoint was demolished, but the trail continues to attract adventurers. Local residents say that, when crossing certain parts of the forest, it is still possible to hear whistles and footsteps in the darkness, a reminder that, in nature, the greatest danger can be human beings themselves. The mystery of the last checkpoint remains unsolved. The shelter has been closed, but reports from hikers about strange noises and makeshift booby traps continue to emerge. Authorities have stepped up security, but the feeling of vulnerability remains. For those who survived, the memory is clear. In that forest, someone knows every trail, every shortcut, and is always on the lookout, waiting for the next victim to cross the last checkpoint. 5. The National Park Observer. Jasper National Park in Canada is one of the last truly wild refuges in North America. Its dense forests, icy lakes, and secluded trails attract adventurers from all over the world. For Alice, a 27-year-old photographer and hiking enthusiast, it was the ideal destination for a retreat of self-discovery and peace. She had no idea that this trip, planned to be solitary and inspiring, would turn into one of the most disturbing stories ever recorded in the region. Alice left early, taking only the essentials: backpack, tent, flashlight, camera, supplies, and a notebook. On the first day, she walked 4 miles between ancient trees and snow-covered mountains. Late in the afternoon, she stopped to rest at a viewpoint and found a worn-out cap with an inscription almost faded. She thought it was curious, but attributed the object to the carelessness of some visitor. She put the cap in her backpack, thinking of returning it to the park's main office when she returned. On the second day, the weather changed. The sky became overcast, and the forest grew quieter. At a new resting point, Alice found a crushed water bottle with the name Sophie handwritten on it. She remembered reading, weeks before, about the disappearance of a hiker named Sophie in the same region. Her discomfort grew, but Alice tried to convince herself that it was just a coincidence. She kept going, but began to notice strange details: fresh footprints in the mud, broken branches, and, at times, the distinct feeling that she was being watched. At dusk, she camped near a stream. While she was preparing dinner, she heard light footsteps among the trees. She turned off the flashlight and stood still, trying to listen better. The silence was oppressive, interrupted only by the sound of running water. Suddenly, a figure passed in the distance, too fast to be an animal. Alice felt her heart race. She decided to sleep with her pocketknife within reach. The next morning, she found a keychain with a picture of a smiling couple hanging from a branch near the campsite. On the back was a date and the name Marcus. Alice recognized the name of another missing hiker, listed on a warning sign at the park entrance. Now the fear was real. She realized that she wasn't just finding lost objects, someone had left them there on purpose. Deciding to shorten the trail and return to the starting point, Alice realized that she was being guided by discreet markers, red ribbons tied to branches, stones piled in strange shapes. At each new resting point, a new object: a bracelet, a scarf, an empty wallet, all belonging to missing people. The feeling of surveillance increased. At one point, when she looked back, she saw a silhouette between the trees, a tall man, wearing camouflaged clothing, his face partially covered by a bandana. He didn't approach, just watched in silence before disappearing back into the woods. The terror reached its peak when Alice Bree, already exhausted and disoriented, found a makeshift shelter, made of branches and tarpaulin. Inside were dozens of personal objects, documents, photos, clothes, backpacks. It was like a macabre altar, a memorial to victims. In a notebook, she found detailed notes about hikers, dates, times, and routes. The author seemed to follow every movement of the victims, choosing them carefully, collecting memories of each one. The pages contained detailed descriptions of habits, rest times, route preferences, and even observations about the behavior of each hiker, as if the observer had spent days or weeks studying each one before acting. As she examined the shelter, she heard footsteps approaching. She hid behind a pile of backpacks and saw the man in camouflage enter, carrying a new souvenir, a woman's bandana, still damp. He muttered to himself, arranging the objects with obsessive care. Alice held her breath, waiting for the right moment to escape. When the man left again, she ran through the woods, guided only by her survival instinct. The escape was desperate. Alice tripped over roots, scratched herself on branches, and felt the presence of her pursuer getting closer and closer. At one point, she heard the sound of an emergency whistle. Someone somewhere, was also lost or calling for help. Alice followed the sound, hoping to find help, but all she found was more scattered objects: a compass, a torn sneaker, a family photo. It was as if the park itself was conspiring to confuse her, leading her back to the observer's territory. After hours of running, exhausted and almost without strength, Alice saw a group of hikers in the distance. She ran towards them, shouting for help. The group, frightened by her condition, helped her reach the base of the park. Alice reported everything to the police, who found the shelter and some of the objects, but the man was never captured. Investigations confirmed that many of the belongings belonged to people who had disappeared in recent years, but the identity of the observer remains a mystery. The case gained national attention and served as a warning to those who venture alone. On Canadian trails, Alice never went hiking alone again. To this day, she avoids talking about what she experienced, but she is certain that, among the silent trees of Jasper National Park, someone is still watching, waiting for the next victim. To add to their collection of memories. 6. The False Guide. In the harsh summer of 2022, a group of 5 tourists, 3 Brazilians, 1 Frenchman and 1 German, embarked on an adventure along the remote trails of Norway, specifically in the Sogn og Fjordane region, famous for its majestic fjords, rugged mountains and dense forests. Seeking an authentic and isolated experience, they hired a local guide, Erik Johansson, recommended by a travel agency specializing in off-the-beaten-path expeditions. What seemed like a guarantee of safety and knowledge would soon turn into a nightmare. Erik arrived promptly on the morning of the departure, a tall man with a thin beard, light-colored eyes, and a thick accent that betrayed his Norwegian origins. He wore worn hiking clothes, carried an old map and a two-way radio. His demeanor was professional, and the confidence he exuded reassured the group. The first few hours were filled with pure wonder. The wild nature, the hidden waterfalls, the absolute silence between the mountains. Erik told local stories, pointed out points of interest and pointed out secret places that only locals knew about. However, on the second day, Erik's behavior began to change. He ignored the previously agreed upon itinerary, deviating onto unmarked trails and claiming to know shortcuts that lazy tourists didn't dare to use. When questioned, he would respond curtly and with a forced smile, avoiding detailed explanations. The group, uncomfortable, tried to argue, but the guide insisted, always with an uneasy and evasive look. The stops became longer, and, at times, Erik would disappear for minutes, returning without giving any explanation. On the third night, they camped in a secluded clearing, surrounded by tall trees and the almost absolute silence of the forest. During dinner, Raphael, one of the tourists, noticed that Erik's two-way radio was turned off. When he tried to turn it on, the guide stopped him, who claimed interference from the mountains, and asked them not to worry. The atmosphere became tense. When everyone went to bed, Raphael, driven by suspicion, discreetly searched the guide's backpack and found identity documents with another name, as well as newspaper clippings about disappearances and unsolved crimes. In the region. The next morning, the group confronted Erik, demanding an explanation. The guide smiled coldly and said they were too far away to worry about bureaucratic details. It was then that the group realized that the real Erik Johansson had probably never shown up. They were in the hands of an imposter. The trail was no longer recognizable, and signs of civilization had disappeared. The imposter began to guide them along increasingly closed paths, avoiding any contact with other hikers or locals. Tensions rose when, upon trying to use the GPS, they discovered that they were completely off the official route. The imposter began to act in an openly hostile manner, controlling schedules, threatening those who tried to stray, and hiding essential supplies. During a break, Anna, the German tourist, tried to escape, but was quickly caught and forced to return under veiled threats. The group realized that they were being led into a trap, where the only rule was survival. On the penultimate night, Raphael and Camille, the Frenchwoman, managed to separate from the group during a sudden storm. Hidden among the rocks and trees, they heard the imposter shout their names, promising that no one would leave alive. They spent the night awake, hearing footsteps, whistles, and the sound of branches breaking in the darkness. At dawn, they decided to follow the course of a stream, hoping to find a way out. After hours of escaping, they found an abandoned cabin with obvious signs of a struggle and personal belongings belonging to other tourists. Among the belongings was a name tag with the real Eric Johansen's name on it. The horror was confirmed. The imposter was a wanted criminal who used the remote trails to capture and eliminate tourists, covering his tracks and changing his identity each season. The cabin seemed to be his hideout, a place where he planned his attacks with frightening precision. Raphael and Camille managed to pick up a weak cell phone signal and sent a distress message. They were found by a rescue team 2 days later, exhausted, dehydrated, and in shock. The other members of the group were also saved, but the imposter disappeared into the mountains, leaving only footprints and fear etched in the victims' memories. The case gained international attention and served as a warning to tourists and adventure agencies. Norwegian police stepped up surveillance of guides and remote trails, but the imposter was never caught. Those who survived were left with the certainty that, in the middle of the wilderness, the greatest danger can come from those who are supposed to ensure their safety, and that on isolated trails, trust can be the difference between life and death. The trauma experienced by the tourists left deep scars. Raphael, Camille, and the others spent months in psychological treatment, trying to overcome the constant fear of being persecuted. The episode also led to changes in local tourism policies, with stricter hiring and certification of guides. However, the shadow of the imposter still looms over Norwegian trails, and stories of suspicious encounters continue to emerge among adventurers. To this day, survivors avoid talking about what happened, but their stories circulate on forums and hiking groups, warning of the real danger that can hide behind a friendly smile and an old map. After all, in the mountains of Norway, nature is beautiful, but also unforgiving, and man can be the most cruel predator of all. 7. No return. Trail. The South African countryside is home to a wild beauty and a sense of isolation that fascinates adventurers from all over the world. For 3 friends, Lucas, Mariana, and Andre, the Waterberg Trail, famous for its landscapes and physical challenges, was the perfect setting for an unforgettable trip. They planned to camp for 3 days, far from any civilization, with only backpacks, a tent, and a printed map. What began as an adventure would soon turn into a desperate fight for survival. The first day was full of excitement. The trio quickly made their way along the trail, marveling at the valleys, rock formations, and exotic wildlife. At dusk, they chose a secluded spot to set up camp. While searching for firewood, Andre noticed strange marks on the ground, overlapping footprints, signs of dragging, and dark stains that looked like dried blood. At first, they tried to rationalize it. Maybe wild animals, maybe poachers. But as they explored the area further, they found torn pieces of fabric, a destroyed backpack, and a pair of sneakers covered in mud and blood. The mood changed immediately. Mariana suggested going back, but Lucas insisted that they might be overreacting. They decided to sleep there, but the night was tense. The sounds of branches breaking, muffled whispers, and footsteps around the tent prevented any rest. In the morning, they realized that someone had tampered with their backpacks, removing the GPS and some of their supplies. Fear set in. They were isolated, with no cell phone signal, and no equipment to guide them. As they tried to find help, they realized they were being followed. At every turn along the trail, they saw figures among the trees and heard muffled laughter. At one point, they came across a makeshift trapper hole covered with leaves and sharpened stakes at the bottom. It was clear that they were not dealing with ordinary criminals, but with people who knew every inch of the forest and were willing to do anything to capture them. Their desperation increased when, in a narrow stretch, they were ambushed. 3 armed men emerged from the bushes, ordering them to drop everything and kneel down. The friends obeyed, but, taking advantage of a distraction, Andre managed to escape into the dense forest. Lucas and Mariana were tied up and taken to an improvised camp, where other tourists were trapped, all in a state of shock and malnutrition. During the night, Andre, hiding, observed the criminals. They were part of a gang that used the trail to capture tourists, extort money from their families, and, in some cases, sell them to drug trafficking networks. The criminals were organized, armed, and brutal. Andre knew he had to act quickly. He waited until dawn, when the kidnappers relaxed their surveillance and managed to get close to the camp. Using rocks and branches, he created a distraction, luring some of the criminals away. Taking advantage of the chaos, Andre freed Lucas and Mariana. The trio, along with 2 other tourists, fled through the woods, guided only by the moonlight. and their instincts were chased silently for hours, with the criminals shooting and shouting threats. At one point, they heard sniffer dogs approaching, and had to cross an icy river to lose their scent. Exhausted, hungry, and injured, they finally spotted a dirt road at dawn. They flagged down a passing truck, and the driver, alarmed by the group's condition, took them to the nearest police station. The police organized a raid, and after days of searching, found the criminal camp. Some of the kidnappers were arrested, but others managed to escape, and reports of disappearances continued to emerge in the following months. The case gained national and international attention, serving as a warning to those who venture out. On the country's isolated trails, Lucas, Mariana, and Andre survived, but they carried deep physical and psychological scars. They never went back on the trail, and their lives were changed forever. The fear of being watched, persecuted and hunted was ingrained in every memory of that one-way trail. The incident exposed a brutal reality. In remote regions of South Africa, violence knows no bounds, and nature, however beautiful, can hide human predators as lethal as any wild animal. For those who survived, the bitter lesson was that in some places, the greatest danger is not getting lost, it's being found. The trauma experienced by the friends was not limited to their time in captivity. In the following months, Lucas developed anxiety attacks and insomnia. Mariana abandoned the trails and began to avoid any trips to rural areas, and Andre, previously the most adventurous of the group, became reclusive and suspicious. The survivors' accounts helped the police identify part of the gang, but many members were never arrested. The criminal camp, found in the middle of the forest, contained personal belongings of dozens of tourists, documents, clothes, and even secretly taken photographs, revealing that the criminals had been monitoring the trail for years. The repercussions of the case led the South African government to increase security on the trails and create awareness campaigns for tourists, but the feeling of impunity and danger remains. Local guides have started to avoid certain stretches, and reports of suspicious encounters have continued to appear on travel forums. Fear has spread among the hiking community, and the Waterberg Trail has lost some of its charm, becoming a symbol of warning to those who believe that adventure is only in the landscape. And so we come to the end of our 7 horror stories involving people who got lost on trails. So, which one scared you the most? Will any of them make you think twice before venturing out alone on your next hike? Tell us in the comments which one was your favorite. If you enjoyed this dive into the darker side of trails and adventures, don't forget to leave a like. This really helps the channel grow and encourages me to bring you more spine-chilling stories. And if you're not a subscriber yet, take advantage now to subscribe and activate the bell.